Hey everyone, this is the section on Neil Fernandez from Marcel van der Linden's Western Marxism and the Soviet Union. This is from chapter 7 of the book, which is titled Collapse and its Aftermath from 1985 to the Present. Neil Fernandez, born 1964, was active in various British anti-Bolshevik communist projects since the 1980s, such as the journal A Communist Effort, published between 1984 and 5, and the London-based Red Menace Collective, 1989 to 1990. Footnote: Personal communication by Fernandez to the author, June 2005. In Fernandez's book, Capitalism and Class Struggle in the USSR, published in 1997, Fernandez tried to develop an autonomist analysis. Footnote: The book was a, quote, contribution to the same area of critique, end quote, as the works of Michael Leibovitz, 1992, and especially Felton Shortall, 1994. End footnote. Elaborating on earlier publications, Fernandez sought to show what Fernandez considered the three defining characteristics of capitalism, namely commodities, wage labor, and production for profit, had all existed in the Soviet Union. In order to prove that the Soviet economy was based on the production, distribution, and consumption of commodities, Fernandez examined each of these aspects of the economy. The sphere of consumption posed few problems because, quote, the basic relationship was one of purchase and sale, end quote. Fernandez. Proof was more difficult with regard to the distribution of producer and consumer goods. These, after all, occurred through barter and competition between enterprises, and as far as the wholesaling of consumer goods were concerned, fairs. Fernandez, however, defines these as relations of exchange, and therefore as renewed commodification. The argumentation became more complex with regard to the sphere of production. Fernandez concluded that the workers were exploited, while the managers competed with each other and with the members of the central bureaucratic elite for supplies and personnel, using a, quote, characteristic mix of maneuvering, negotiation, bargaining, and bureaucratic diktat, end quote. Fernandez. Quote, certainly, this competition did not operate in a market form, nor could bureaucrats pass on their portions of control to those whom they individually chose as their successors. Instead, control was passed on through a mixture of bureaucratic appointment and unofficial blot distribution, including via the inheritance of privilege in the, quote, education, end quote, system, end quote. Fernandez. Despite these observations, Fernandez nevertheless identified capitalist relations in this sphere as well. Quote, since there was private appropriation, and there was also competition among bureaucrats, post holders, each of whom possessed a portion of control over the means of production, and hence over the extraction of surplus product, then it is clear that this competition was itself neither more nor less than the system wherein portions of such privately appropriated control were exchanged. It is clear that this competition was itself neither more nor less than the system wherein portions of such privately appropriated control were exchanged. And anything exchanged and mediated through labor is by definition a commodity. End quote. Fernandez. Oh, there's a footnote that I missed. It says, blot is the use of personal contacts, influence, or bribery to acquire goods and services. End footnote. Labor power, end footnote. Labor power was a commodity in the USSR because, quote, the wage packet given to the worker in return for her labor power was real rather than nominal, end quote. Fernandez. And finally, the Soviet Union featured also a constant striving to accumulate a surplus applied for expanded production. After Fernandez believed to have proved that in this way that the USSR was not just based on generalized exchange, but also featured a generalized drive for accumulation, Fernandez concludes, quote, "It follows that it was capitalism," end quote, but not a state capitalism, a category which Fernandez regards as having no valid application, because, quote, "private appropriation always held full sway in the USSR," end quote, and not a Western capitalism either, where, quote, considerations of currency dominated accumulation, end quote, were supreme. Rather, it was a kind of bureaucratic capitalism, quote, wherein portions of control over labor power, labor, the product, and the productive forces in general, portions taking the form of permission, clout, and blot, were negotiated, exchanged, and crucially invested in production with the aim of accumulation, end quote. Fernandez. In this system, money had taken the form of, quote, bureaucratic forms of permission and more generally blot, end quote. Fernandez. That's the end of this section. Thank you so much for listening.